morning and welcome. I am Josep Maria Puig, Fundació Família i Benestar Social President and Vice President of Cohabitac. On behalf of Cohabitac, the Association of Foundations that promote and manage social and affordable rental housing in Catalonia, we thank you for your presence and your interest in hearing the perspectives of the speakers on this panel. We trust that this panel, participated by Cohabitac, Provivienda, Cluj Housing of Ireland, and the UNESCO Chair on Housing at the Rovira Virgili University, will provide you with new insights of your efforts to make housing more affordable, especially for the most vulnerable. With these words, we also want to express our gratitude to the organizers of this International Social Housing Festival for facilitating the organization of this event. Thank you and good morning.
Thank you. Thank you, Josep. My name is Damaris Barajas. I'm planning director, thank you. At Provivienda, we are co-organizers. And the will of Cohabitac and Provivienda organizing this event is to advance in the mutual cooperation to promote a new model of social and affordable housing in Spain, in which the non-profit sector is a key agent. Today we will learn about housing associations, among other formulas to reach this goal. These are non-profit organizations to promote, manage, and rehabilitate social and affordable rental housing, among others. The development of this formula in Spain is still in its early stages, but it has proven successful in other countries, so we want it to be mainstream in Spain for our future social housing model. Both organizations are determined to push this new model to expand the affordable housing stock in Spain from non-profit and generate a shift to social housing, the change of paradigm that Adacola was pointing out this morning. About this formula and its benefits we will discuss today. We don't want to steal more time from the experts, so I will give the floor to Ainara, who will conduct the panel. Thank you, Ainara, and thank you all.
Well, thank you very much to Josep and Damaris for the introduction. And thank you very much to the organizers of the session, to the organizers of the festival, and for all of you for being here. So today we're going to have a dialogue in which we're going to be discussing new models for providing social and affordable housing by nonprofit organizations. So today's dialogue is going to be structured in 3 rounds of dialogue, plus potentially a 4th round of dialogue, in which we are going to want to hear the questions that you would like to pose to the speakers. So in order to do that, you have a QR code on the slide behind me, and you can enter the questions that you would like to pose to speakers by filling in the form that you will see when you access that QR code. If we don't have time to go through these questions that you pose, the organizers will answer those questions and they will post the answers to the questions on both the websites of Provivienda and Cohabitac. So that being said, I'm going to start this first round of the dialogue, which is going to be about introducing the work that the different organizations present in the panel are doing to all of you. And I'm going to start with a very brief introduction of the speakers that are with us today, a very brief and very unfair introduction of the work that they are doing and that they have done in their careers. So with us, we have Xavier Mauri. Xavier is the General Director of Habitat 3 and a member of Cohabitac. And he has a very extensive experience working with the provision of affordable and social housing. And since 2014, he has been one of the founding members and the leaders of Habitat 3, which is one of the leading organizations in terms of providing social and affordable housing in the Spanish state. We also have Elena, who is the head of research and evaluation at Provivienda. And I'm going to have to read a little bit more about Elena's career. So she has been coordinating the project Alliances for Affordable Housing from Not-Profit in particular diagnosis and networking of the third sector for the provision of housing financed by the Ministry of Social Rights and the Agenda 2030. And she has over 20 years of professional experience working on housing and urbanism for several universities, private organizations, and different administrations, particularly at the local and regional level. We also have with us Steve Loveland, who is the resident manager of engagement of Clwyd Housing from Ireland. Steve also has over 20 years of working experience, working in particular with the management of homelessness and the management of addiction services, and he is also a member of Social Value Ireland. And last but not least, we have Luria Rambea, who is the deputy director of the UNESCO Housing Chair at the Rovira and Virgili University, and she is the co-director of the postgraduate course on housing policies, as well as a private law lecturer at this university, the University Rovira and Virgili. And that being said, we're gonna kickstart with the first round of questions, and I'm gonna start with you, Nuria. So, why are we here? What is the relevance of speaking about the model of providing social and affordable housing through non-profit organizations? What led you to studying this, for instance, in your very well awarded PhD dissertation on the different models, the different European models for providing social and affordable housing?
Thank you. Thank you for the presentation. And Adam, thank you also the co-organizers of this session, Provivienda and Cohabitac, for having us. And I would like also to thank the colleagues here that will be participating with me, and also Professor Mullins, who was the link between us and Clwyd. So he's not here, but he took an important role there. So to answer your first but not easy question, I think we could structure the answer in two parts. The first one is why is important to talk about management, and then why are we focusing on the this private non-profit model, or in terms of European models, housing associations, for example. So probably those who are from Catalonia, from Spain, know this part, but I think it's important to give a glimpse, to give a brief context. Why are we talking about management of social housing? Why are we even talking about management? And that's a big achievement already, because a decade ago was not so common to talk about managing social housing. It was common to talk about producing, building, but not managing the stock. And that's because historically Spain have housing policies have been related to economic policies, and so most of the social housing that was built to sell, not to rent, and so there was no need to, in general, to manage that stock. And that said, our breaking point, of course, it's the economic crisis, 2007, 2008, and then concatenation of crises, which have put the production of social rental housing at the forefront, at the spotlight. And here is when the red light goes on, and we see the difficulties in building these efficient management structures that we need in order to increase in 3, 4, 5 times the current stock that we have. Because we have different challenges. We have, first of all, lack of numbers, lack of data. We have heard this morning 2%, 1%. The reality is that these numbers are unreliable. The exact social housing stock is unknown in Spain, first of all, because concepts are not clear at all either. And then where are those housing, those dwellings, in which conditions, who manage them? All this data is not that easy to determine. That's one thing. So we have this lack of numbers and data. Then we have a plethora of entities managing and providing social housing, because we do not have, and it's one thing that we will focus on today, a legal framework for all of them that put them under the same umbrella. So there's a great variety: public, private for profit, non-for-profit, cooperatives, and so on. And then, of course, we have diversity of social housing regimes, so a lot of programs, a lot of legal regimes, and we face difficulties and complexities in that sense. Timelines, different programs, different multi-level governance, that adds complexity, and that complexity is even more relevant when going to the beneficiaries of those housing, and because every time, and with this concatenation of crises, the people accessing those housing is more vulnerable and vulnerable, and we need to face that as well. So that is when management is important, and we need to look where? Well, we need to look on those countries that have been managing large social housing stocks for years and years, decades, to learn not only from the achievements, but of course to learn as well from the challenges, risks, and even wrong steps that have been taken. And that leads to the, try to be quick, the why are we focusing on housing association model, private non-for-profit model. And here, well, we have mentioned that it is a model that prevails in countries with large social rental housing stocks, and that's also data from the OECD. It's a model with this hybrid nature. They come from the community-based or philanthropical organizations, but took a step forward and create this hybrid nature between the state, community, and the market, and that gives them interesting points. They focus, and that's, for me, it's the key point, they focus on the involvement of tenants and the participation and the caring of tenants and also the community. So it's not only about managing housing, it's about managing people as well. And that comes with this diversity of activities that they have, different sources of financing that makes this model very, very interesting. Also, the new urban agenda talks, not new anymore, but it's the last one, so talks about the importance of linking. If we want to overcome social exclusion, we need to link housing or the management of housing with employment, with education, with health, and that is something that housing associations have been doing. And also a model that is recommended in different international reports and studies. And I think last but not least, they are now big in the sector, but it is true that they have an origin, and Steve probably will talk about that. And their origin, it's not that far from where we are now. So it's a beginning there.
Well, thanks a lot, Nuria. I think that was a very good first intervention in terms of pointing out at what are going to be some of the key ideas that will be structuring this dialogue, right? So it's the importance of management, speaking about management. It's the importance also of learning from places in which these kind of models have been in place for an admirable period of time already. And in that regard, Steve from Clued Housing, I think that we're going to continue learning with you from your experience. So what can you tell us about Clued Housing? What is Clued Housing? And what can you tell us about its origins and how it got to be the large organization that it is at the moment?
Well, yeah, firstly, just to reiterate what Nuria's already said, just to thank our organisers here today as well for extending the invitation for us to come and sit with you today. I think you might be overselling it slightly by saying there's going to be a lot of learning here from me, but I will factor in the fact that although I'm coming from Ireland here today, I'm obviously Scottish, so I'll try and temper the accent slightly. At this stage, I can barely be understood by my own family, never mind. The Irish don't understand me and the Scots don't understand me, so we'll sail off on that trajectory. So Clued, yes, is a not-for-profit charity that's providing over 10,000 homes to people in housing need in Ireland. We're currently looking after over 28,000 residents. Formed in 1994, so next year we will be 30 years old. And something we're particularly proud of is that our first employee is our current CEO. So there's stories going around among some of our residents of Brian O'Gorman, our CEO, who used to cycle from the city centre in Dublin out to the suburbs to collect rent on his bike. Now, obviously, we have over 10,000 units now spread all across Ireland, so as fit as Brian is, we don't ask him to collect rent on his bike anymore. But yeah, there's an incredible growth then in terms of the Clwyd that originated and the size of the organisation it is today. Incidentally, the name Clwyd is an Irish word for the seat by the fire. So it was traditional to have an empty seat that was kept closest in the corner next to the fire for a guest or for the venerable elderly member of the family. And it's something we cling to now, and we hold on to that in our vision, our mission, and is holding that seat by the fire at the centre of our thoughts to ensure that the resident is still central in all our decision-making processes. I think in terms of the impact Clwyd has at the moment on the market, the AHB sector has grown, and last year the AHB sector would have provided about 43% of all the social housing units that came on stream there last year. And there's an expectation under the government's Housing for All programme that will continue to provide about 43% of all the social housing is to be delivered over the course of that plan up until 2026. So that's about another 21,000 properties. Massive growth as well, even in terms of the last decade, where the approved housing body sector, the number of units has grown by about 2,000%. So a massive increase there in terms of who we are now. But yeah.
Well, that's very impressive. And also thanks a lot for speaking about the origin of the name of the organization, which I think also calls our attention to the third element, which I think is critical for this discussion, which is the need for really putting people's needs at the center and ensuring that they're also part of designing and implementing housing solutions. So I'm going to move to our colleagues from Provivienda and Cohabitac and Habitat 3. And I'm going to ask you the same question as I asked Steve. So what can you tell us about Provivienda and Cohabitac? And what can you tell us about the origins and the impact that your organizations are having on the Catalan and Spanish housing systems?
Thank you, Ainara, and thank you to the organization of the festival and to the other colleagues for this great introduction. I'm going to try to explain shortly about the history of Provivienda. Provivienda was founded in 1999 as a part of a project that aimed to facilitate the emancipation of young people. To achieve this, it created an affordable rental housing program that through a series of warranties and incentives for the landlords, for the homeowners, facilitated young people access to housing. At the beginning of the 90s, similar programs were established for migrants and other vulnerable groups as, I don't know, but this time such people at informal settlements in the cities, homeless, refugees from Bosnia, people with mental health problems during the initial deinstitutionalization processes and so on. And these groups were supported by Provivienda through programs with housing-focused approaches and housing-led methodologies. Through these initiatives, Provivienda played a role as a mediator and a housing provider, while also incorporating social professional support. From the beginning, the rental mediation worked very well and was really well received by the authorities. So it became at the end public policy in many local places, municipalities. And in 2011, the program was finalist in the World Habitat Award. And recently, we conducted an impact assessment using social return on investment methodology, which yield a return of 1.35 euros per each euro invested. In this sense, Provivienda has contributed to innovative housing solutions to the housing system, many of which has been developed as part of public policies. For instance, Provivienda has provided homelessness solutions outside the traditional shelter system and introduced the housing first approach in Spain with Garci, with an alliance, and with a very positive impact in Spain, and has become essential in the national strategy to combat homelessness. In this alliance, Provivienda's role has mainly focused on the provision and management of over 400 housing units, I guess, and as well as accompanying the beneficiaries in their housing-related matters through the presence of housing specialists, housing technicians. This model of housing provision for stable accommodation problems has been replicated in other housing exclusion situations, such as women victims of gender-based violence, refugees, processes of deinstitutionalization and prevention. And it's, in summary, Provivienda, since its origins, has managed over 67,000 homes, and only in 2022 it has managed 2,500 units. So that's it. And Xavier?
Thank you. Well, first of all, it's not working?
Maybe we can change.
Yeah.
Okay. This works, yes. First of all, I want to say thank you for inviting us. Well, we are part of the organization in this panel, but we are very happy to be here with all these colleagues that they are explaining very interesting things. But for us, it's very important this session, because we want to show how important is our works, and that in this case we are a federation. Cohabitac is a federation of 15 foundations, non-profit organizations that develop and manage social and affordable housing. And for us, it's very important this social support for the tenants. And we were born around 20 years ago, and we are very diverse, because we are 15 different organizations, and we were born in different times. We have some organizations that they are 70 years, others with 40, 30, and the youngest is less than 10 years. And the origin, they are diverse too. There are some religious organizations, some philanthropic aims from particular individuals, some entrepreneurs and professionals, and the third sector. I think this is very important. The third sector in different organizations are the organizations that decide to start these foundations. And the first foundations, because in Spain you explained, and in the previous in the auditorium, was very common to sell the social. It's like oxymoron, sell and social. But here was common. Here we have only these 2%, but we produce millions of social housing, millions, 6 million, 7 million, but we lost, because we sell, and after some years it's not social, it's totally lost. And this is a shame, because we invest a lot of resources, but now we don't have this 10%, 7%, 15% that have other countries. But this first foundation, they start to sell, and a price very, very affordable, was very social, for try the people that they cannot enter in the market. They can, in this case, they can buy. But after the years, these foundations start to change to the social and affordable rental housing. And we do now social and affordable housing, and very important, inclusive social housing. We support for people with very vulnerable situation, homeless and other kind of situations. We work around Catalonia, and of course we work especially in the metropolitan areas, but we work around the territory. And in our history, together we promote more than 10,000 apartments, and actually manage together more than 3,500 units. And every year is increasing, because now we are in a time that we are promoting much more and buying. Later we can speak about this. And now we are managing 7% of total stock of the social housing here in Catalonia. And we have the commitment, and this is an offer to the administrations, that I don't know if here there are someone, but in Catalonia and in Spain, that we can produce every year 1,000 apartments, dwellings. This is not a lot for but for us it's a lot, and after that we can produce more. But we need, and after we can speak about the stability, the framework. And bueno, the Cohabitac is the result of this network to work together, and you need forces to do much more and better.
Thanks a lot. Yes, this one's working now. Is it? Yes? Okay, so this one's working. So thanks a lot to both of you. So from your interventions, I think we can highlight a fourth critical element for this discussion, which is the role of non-profit organizations in finding innovative ways through which social housing policies can be used as a lever for social inclusion, right? And this is necessary, this is a critical lever through which to address problems that are structural in our society. You were speaking about homelessness, you were speaking about the difficulties facing the youth in our societies in terms of accessing housing. And you were speaking about the diversity that is actually existing within, in this case, the Catalan and the Spanish ecosystem, and how Cohabitac is a key piece, a fundamental piece in leveraging the synergies that happen across the different organizations. So you have spoken about your origins, you have spoken about your evolution, and before I turn to Nuria to ask her a question with which we're going to move to the second round of dialogue, I would like to ask you, to Provivienda, to Cohabitac, and to Clud Housing, are there any key factors that you would like to highlight, perhaps, Steve, from your experience, in terms of how Clud Housing became the large organization that it is at the moment, and with the weight that it currently has within the Irish housing system? So are there any key factors for accelerating this consolidation and this expansion of the model that perhaps we could take into account to translate them to the Catalan and the Spanish housing systems?
Yeah, I think there's probably value in looking 30 years back again. In the mid-80s, there was around 75 housing associations, and they're providing around 2,000 homes. So now you've got up closer to 500 associations providing 55,000 homes, you know. So that expansion, you know, in the mid-80s, what happened in 1984, the CAS funding model was introduced. Because those initial housing associations, as Nura's already alluded to, were semi-philanthropic. There was quite often a religious connection to them as well, and they were providing housing for generally elderly people, people with disabilities, people who are experiencing homelessness. And the CAS funding model was essentially 100% grant funding to provide those homes, but again for those specific cohorts. So that's our initial expansion in that area there. But then it was fully 10 years later when the CLSS model was introduced, which provided again 100% grant funding essentially through a non-repayable loan with the local authorities that was then passed on to the HPs for provision of general needs housing. And I think that was a catalyst for a lot of new entries into the area then. I suppose it's worth pointing out as well that in that period from the mid-80s towards the early 90s, there was a shift in terms of the financing from housing provision from local government back to central government as well. And so AHPs naturally took on a greater role then. But subsequent governments, and more latterly, have really expected the approved housing body sector to do a lot of the heavy lifting in terms of meeting their objectives under the various housing plans. So as we've said there already this morning, 43% of the expected delivery over the next 4 years now will be done by the approved housing body sector. You know, so that's a significant catalyst in itself. But maybe a catalyst that isn't talking about enough that's worth mentioning is the role that trust plays as an accelerator. Even it's maybe worth pointing out there was connotations. Simon Brook, who was our head of policy, who's sadly no longer with us, 20 years ago wrote a blue paper on what it would take to develop the sector further. But he outlined a couple of challenges there. One of them was the relative imbalance between how social housing was viewed in comparison to owner occupation as well, and home ownership. But Another one was around that idea of voluntary housing bodies. The reason we're called approved housing bodies was to sort of mitigate against the sense that voluntary housing associations there was maybe a connection there between them being less skilled because they were voluntary, you know. And there's been a huge drive, and we've been really strongly supported in terms, I know we've got colleagues here from the Irish Council for Social Housing, which is a federation, national federation of all the approved housing body members. There's about 270 of them at the moment with them. That building of trust within the sector with our finance partners, with our local government partners, our national government partners, so that we can be seen as someone who can work in partnership alongside them to deliver on those targets, has been absolutely massive. That we're seen as capable, that we're providing good quality of homes, and that, you know, we're up to the job. I wouldn't discount the value placed on trust within the sector, you know, as an accelerant for growth. And that journey doesn't end. I think if you get to the point where you think we're now trusted partners, then, you know, that's where you start to encounter problems. You're always striving for, you know, for stronger regulation and for better governance, so that you can be seen as committed partners to working alongside government to deliver on their social housing targets. But yeah, trust is a key accelerant in that.
Thanks a lot, Steve. I think that's a very precious insight. And I want to very quickly turn to both of you to see how this that Steve has just shared with us, to see how this resonates, or it doesn't resonate with you. To ask you a little bit, how do you think is the current state of change within the sector in the Spanish and the Catalan realities? Very quickly, just.
Well, no, I with Steve, the last words, trust, I think is very important, and because sometimes the public administration and sometimes us, we don't have this trust, and we work together. We are next to, and we have to work together. And for example, we have a big problem. It's not only the average, the percentage of the housing, social housing. It's the public investment. We now is 0.1% of the GDP of the country. It's dedicated to the social housing. I think this have to change if you want to do serious things, because without money, it's nothing appear. And I think the trust and the networks for us to work together, the Cohabitac, that I don't say before, but we are here in Catalonia, for us is very important, because after the financial crisis in 2008 was a big problem, and we didn't have enough money. But I think now we are stronger than this time, because we are more and stronger, and we have more capacity to advocate in the public administration. Why? Because we decide to do in the third sector and the old organizations. Now we are more together, and we are more in the agenda, our proposals. I think this is a key thing to try to change, that we can provoke the change, not wait for the politicals to decide. We can provoke and I think this session is very important for us, and we try to speak in the different other places, but it's important to provoke this change.
Yeah, thank you, Steve, and thank you, Xavier. I'm going to try to summarize the main idea I was trying to explain at this point. And I think if I try to make it briefer, the main point in this question could be that Provivienda has make a step, or is making a step, from a model of housing manager or housing provider offering or facing and emerging profiles and housing exclusion, residential exclusion situations in subsidies and way of financing, and is making a big step trying to become a housing association, actually. And now recently we developed the last new strategic plan, and we realized that given the market, the real estate market, and our little small housing stock by the moment, we needed to strengthen our actions aimed at becoming a housing association. And in fact, our vision is to promote an ethical, social, and non-profit housing provision model, and especially focus on a non-profit approach.
Well, thanks a lot to all of you. So I think that this fifth element of trust, which is also strongly linked with the idea of co-responsibility, right? This also emerges as one of these structural components of this discussion. And let me do something that's a little bit cheeky, but I'm gonna turn to Nuria to ask her for, don't be scared, to ask her for what her views are on from your perspective, that you have this comparative approach to the study of this kind of model across different European states. In your perspective, from this comparative perspective, what would you identify as being some of these key elements that Steve has pointed at some, Xavi and Elena, I was going to call you Natalia. Xavi and Elena have also pointed out some other elements. From your comparative perspective, would you highlight some other complementary elements to this discussion? And with your response, we're going to enter directly into the second round of this dialogue, in which we're going to be talking about challenges and opportunities. So if you could identify these key elements that enable growth and expansion and consolidation of the model, and start speaking about what challenges and opportunities can be derived from them, that would be fantastic.
Do we have an hour? Super easy question again. No, but I think one of the key elements have been already mentioned by the three of them, which makes it like big quorum there. It's the funding, the financing, and I'm gonna go there, but I think that's the second element, because for me, studying the European housing association models in different countries, you see that the pathways that they have followed, it's different. The origin is the same, as we were mentioning before. These small NGO philanthropic organizations, Catholic, religious organizations sometimes even, but how did they got this dominant position in the sector? And even though the pathways have been different, from more public control to less public control, from more public financing to less public, or the other way around, there are, for me, two key elements there. And the first and decisive one is the creation and the existence of a specific legal framework for those housing providers. So despite being an association, foundation, even, for example, in England, limited private organizations, they are under the same legal framework, the same umbrella. So you need to comply with some requirements, and you get these approved housing bodies in Ireland, or housing providers in England, or authorized, well, I'm not going to say it in Dutch because it's impossible, but public housing institutions in the Netherlands, for example. No? So the key element, the first key element, is having this specific legal framework that we do not have in Spain, we do not have in Catalonia, and that gave those entities, those organizations, legal recognition and legal support. And for that, I mean, they were taking into account when designing and implementing policies. They had to follow some requirements, so they had already some guidelines to follow in terms of managing, in terms of being economically viable, in terms of which activities are they allowed to do or not, or in terms also of following different sources of financing. So despite their legal nature, they were playing a big role in designing and implementing policies. And the second point here is that by being under this umbrella, they were enabled to access public funding, And that is the funding measure that has been mentioned, which would be the second key element. So in the 80s and 90s of the last century, it's the big change for the turning point for these organizations, and that's because there was an injection, a big injection of public money to those entities, also through not only grant subsidies, but also through access to land or stock transfers, social housing stock transfers. And that meant the public administration was enabling those entities to grow in the sector under those legal frameworks requirements, and the public administration took a role, more strategic role, as an enabler, more than direct provider management that was left to those entities. And in that sense, that allowed those entities to grow, that allowed those entities to accumulate capital, to accumulate housing assets. And after, with those housing assets, they could enter, they could be low risk investment in the financial and capital markets, for example. Or they could, sweating the assets, as they say. So their main income is the rents that they get. But if you have large housing stock, then it is easier then. Or also even selling or demolishing or renovating properties. They also have diversification of activities, diversification of sources of financing. And that's the key, but the starting point is this accumulation of assets as a collateral at the beginning. Which at the same time, I would like to mention that everything is not super nice and easygoing, but there are risks. Of course, there are risks. Financialization is a big risk there. And we were talking before that housing association, one of their key elements is the involvement and participation of tenants and the involvement in the community. But of course, entering those more private sources of financing mean growing, mean merging, mean creating group structures that can, we need to balance there in order not to lose this local view, this local point of view, this tenant involvement, because then you need more qualified personnel if you enter these kind of activities. So it's more difficult to involve tenants. Of course, if you do not want to be seen as a risk, then you might avoid renting to some vulnerable groups. So those are risks that might be taken into account. Also, of course, the moral hazard and the entering some capital markets that can be very, very, very dangerous in that sense. So those are risks that need to be taken into account, but I would say those, for me, are the key elements. Creating a legal framework for all the housing providers, and then giving them that power, and public administration acting more like an enabler and setting, let's say, putting the rules, but then allowing for those entities. And that's, I must say, something that we do not have yet, and that the current national housing law, Housing Act, the 12/2023, is missing. There's it doesn't talk about management of social housing, and it doesn't create that legal framework that would have been the perfect spot there. It even complicates more the sector, because it creates different concepts of social housing, protected housing, but then limited supported housing. It creates different concepts. So for me, it even adds more complexity. And in that sense, for example, the book that I published a year ago, following my PhD thesis, I create a first draft of how this legal framework could work. And we, from the university, we also created the certificate of good management of social housing. So because we see that entities need those guidelines and need those transparency and need to know, or to certificate that what they are doing is quality managing, and their managing follows efficient, follows sustainable, and follows quality criteria. And what we did is, following international and national research, create those parameters that needs to be fulfilled in order to be considered that an entity is fulfilling all the minimum requirements to manage properly housing, but not only housing, but also people. And for example, Habitat 3 was part of the pilot project, and we gave the certificate there, as well as Smausa, one public entity in Catalonia. So we are in the path, but I think a legal framework is key.
Thanks a lot. I think that was extremely useful. Even if you didn't have an hour, you conveyed messages that were.
I didn't look at the clock.
You know, it was like a very well condensed hour worth of key messages, and I think that there's something that I'm really enjoying from this conversation. Can you switch the microphone? Thanks.
Not allowed to speak anymore.
No, it isn't working. Sorry, you have to.
Okay, no worries. So there's something that I'm really enjoying from this conversation, and it is that we're talking about trust, and we're talking about trust in terms that are not abstract. And capacity building, the importance of having a coherent legal framework that allows to build trust, to convey this idea that the people who are engaging in the provision of social and affordable housing from non-profit organizations, they are capable of doing so with quality. So I think that this is a very important element, also linking to how we're speaking about trust and co-responsibility. So given, I'm going to take advantage of the fact that you have highlighted these two key notions, so the need for a legal framework and the need for the state institutions, local and regional governments, as well as national governments, to take more of an enabling role with respect to the provision of social and affordable housing by non-profit organizations. And I'm going to take the opportunity of using these two elements as guiding elements for the second part of the dialogue. And I'm going to now turn to you, Steve, and ask you, so in your experience, what is your relationship in terms of challenges and opportunities having to do with the legal framework in Ireland and with this idea of receiving policy support from the state institutions in your country?
What I liked about how you've framed that is you've mentioned the challenges and opportunities, specifically in terms of that regulatory environment, because I think too often regulations can be seen as something that's, you know, going to be overly onerous, or, you know, that's going to create a regulatory burden on people, that, you know, that it becomes, you think more in that challenge mindset than in that opportunity mindset. But I think in any business environment, you know, regulations are a good thing, but particularly in complex environments such as what we have in housing, you know, they become really prized assets, you know, regulations at that point. And you know, regulations have the potential to build organizational resilience. You know, as Nura's already identified, it's the assurances it gives to non-governmental sources of finance, private finance. There's the stakeholder confidence that it generates as well. So I really view that regulatory environment as being a massive opportunity. But of course, in order for it to be an opportunity, you have to be ahead of it. You know, I think sometimes you can view regulations or submissions to your regulators as being of a one-off piece, an annual activity that you do. You really have to get to the point that, you know, that regulatory evidence is baked into the organization. It's just something you do as your business as usual. And, you know, as possibly the data nerd in the room, thank you for mentioning data earlier, data is massively important in this respect, you know, because you're reliant on the data that you can produce. And quite often we tend to look at data retrospectively, you know, so it's, or as a drunk person might use a lamppost for support rather than illumination. And I think you have to get to that point where you're trying to get ahead of that. You know, what is the evidence that we need to build into our organizations now so that we comply with that regulatory framework when it does arrive? Because part of that evidencing is, even in terms of ESG that's coming down the line as well, we need to be thinking about that now, how that's going to be reported on. But think in terms of how systems impact on your ability to manage your own data, and how human beings impact on your ability to manage your own data. Because, you know, one of the difficulties we've had is trying to create that golden thread between data input and frontline staff, which is, you know, making that connection between the rationale and the reason behind having good data and strong data and the work that they're doing on the front line on a daily basis. You know, so thinking in terms of how the human being interacts with data and how they can compromise that data when it comes to reporting back as well, I think is really valuable. So yeah, that would be, I suppose, the main opportunities, I think, within data is around providing that assurances. Don't be afraid of regulation, it's a wonderful thing. So long as it's baked in and it's part of what you do on a day-to-day basis. It seems almost anathema to some people, you know, because especially coming from the third sector, you know, that it does, we do have that mindset that it might be a too onerous or something that's not exactly in keeping, but it's very much connected to the work that we do and, you know, the ability to deliver more homes and put more people in safe and secure environments.
Yes, thanks a lot for that. And I think that both in Nuria's intervention as well as in your intervention, we saw something that is very important, and I think that's also something that needs to be highlighted from having this conversation within non-profit organizations, which is the fact that we're talking about having access to financial markets, and immediately we're talking about people. We're talking about data, we're immediately talking about people. And I think that this is a critical element, and it's also a guiding value that needs to be lighting the way. You were speaking about the candlelight. I was really seeing that image, and I think that that's an important thing to bear in mind. So same question goes to you. So in terms of challenges and opportunities, what would you highlight from your engagement with the legal framework in the Catalan and the Spanish realities, and the role of public institutions more as enablers than as leading actors in terms of doing the heavy lifting?
I think I will later focus on the challenges on financing, and also we will go on talking on data, because I think it's another important point related as well as the importance of alliances. But in this point, I would like to give you just a little concrete framework of the legal framework in Spain, and I think I can make a little national overview, and Xavier maybe can show you and talk you more about the regional governments and its roles. And well, so Spain, for those of you who are not from here, first of all, we have to say and note that Spain has 3 different levels, the national, the regional, and the local level of administrations, and many policies have to be coordinated in these 3 levels. But housing policies has given to regional governments. But at the national level, well, until very recently, as Natalia has said, we didn't have a housing law, and it has been approved less than a month ago. Our very first law for the right to housing. I think I agree in a way with Natalia about the Nuria. Natalia is all around. Hello, Natalia. And sorry. And I think besides the challenges we still have with this regulatory framework, I would like to recognize the supporting it gives to the social housing stock that has to be developed by the third sector organizations. And as well, also acknowledges the role of the third sector in the social economy and the social economy in promoting affordable housing. Again, about this affordable with incentives, these new concepts that is introducing the law. However, it is still difficult to evaluate how is it going to go, and as the implementation is still ongoing. But on the other hand, we would like to highlight the opportunities related to the Program 6 within the State Access to Housing Plan. This program provides financing for home purchases up to 60%, with the commitment to rent at a maximum price for at least 50 years to vulnerable population. And the potential beneficiaries are public administrations as well as non-profit organizations and social and solidarity economy entities. So this can serve as a financing tool, but it has to be implemented in the regional governments. I mean, they have to explicitly state that non-profits can be beneficiaries. I mean, they have to develop the program in the regional governments. It only gives the framework and it gives us an opportunity. And Provivienda has already signed an agreement with the government of Canary Islands, for instance, which includes 76 housing units. But it could be important for other regions to open this way of support for the third sector. However, it is crucial to complement this tool with another financial support for all the competent administrations. Besides this, as I said before, the role of the regional governments is key in developing regulatory frameworks for housing. And in this regard, I think Catalonia is a good example for the possibilities that this kind of support gives us all. So I think Xavier may be able to provide further insights on this point.
Thank you. It's working now, yes. We have these three levels that it's a very complex managing these the three levels of administration. But in Catalonia, we have our own regulation, but a significant portion of the budget comes from the national government. And this creates many, many problems because sometimes the central government decide to put the money in different lines, not the lines that the regional government decide to do. And this needs more coordination and provoke these problems. And some examples that Catalonia approved in the last years that help to provide social housing by non-profit organizations. It is very interesting. I think for us it's an opportunity, but this can be a big change, but we'll see in the next years. And first, there is a small regulations of the social promoters, but it's not connected with the managing. It's only that you have the right, the organizations, to receive a public land. But they only say, okay, you have the right, and after that you only have to follow the limitation of the prices, but not about the managing. That I think is very interesting, the things that you are explaining, that this will be another step that Nuria explained, that your certificate is not public, it's voluntary, but I think it can be a first step for that we can do in the future. And the possibility to transfer public land or buildings for renovate. Because sometimes with the regulations of Europe say, no, it's not possible, you have to do like a contract and the private companies, they can come, and after that they pay more money, and in this, I think it's a big thing that in other parts of Spain don't have. Subsidies, loans for development, that this is a good thing that now, some weeks ago, was a new line. Right to buy on sales by banks and investment funds. After the financial crisis, the banks take thousands of hundreds of thousands of millions of flats, and they sell sometimes with a prices very, very cheap, and now we have the right to buy for the same price. And this is, we for example, the organization of Cohabitac, we buy not a lot, but we bought 500 of, more than 500 of these dwellings, and subsidized loans and grants to buy these dwellings. And this helps to us because before we have to go to the banks, normal banks, pay the price of the market, and now we have a subsidized rates interest. And support for the management of social inclusion housing. It's not a lot, but it's a small word we say the xarxa habitatges inclusió, and I think the administration have to understand that managing is not free. If we don't have surpluses, we need to manage it in the good way, to do the support, to do a good job. And sometimes, because the public administration, they don't know how much cost to manage. Here in Spain, they don't know. They pay and pay, but they don't know. And always when we ask, say, okay, but this, you always ask for money, yes, but we need money to do the job. It's not free job. Well, except if we were voluntaries, but we are professionals and we do a good job. And for this reason, we need the involvement, I said before, but I want to repeat, involvement and coordination of all levels of public administration to create an effective framework that promotes the development of the relevant social housing stock. That we don't have this relevant, but we need, if we don't have this, we cannot do.
Well, thanks a lot. I think that is precisely the sixth critical element that we could extract from this conversation, right? It's the necessity for effective multi-level governance that then in turn helps have an effective legal framework. It's not just about having a legal framework, it's about having very clear what outcomes this legal framework needs to enable. So I think that I'm very sad to be saying this, but we have very, very little time left. So surprise. So I'm gonna suggest moving directly into the third round of dialogue. And what I'm gonna do is I'm gonna be asking two final questions because we have 15 minutes. So I'm not gonna be directing the questions at any of you in particular, but if you feel compelled to answer, please just raise your hand, give me a hint, and I'll pass the mic to you. So the third round of dialogue is about how to upscale the efforts that these organizations are currently doing on the ground. So it's about alliances, it's about strategies, and in a sense we could relate back to the notion that Nuria was highlighting. So this idea of managing to secure policy support, and what are the challenges and perhaps some concrete experiences in this regard. So would any of you, would you like to share perhaps one or two concrete experiences of strategies or alliances that have helped you upscale concrete initiatives, concrete projects, or concrete lines of work? I was going to say, no, you're not shy.
I'm very shy and English more. Well, for example, Cohabitac is a good example for us because now we are more stronger, and now we are speaking with Provivienda and other organizations to try to make a bigger around all the country. And for example, we are connected with the third sector. Because before Cohabitac was not member of there is a big organization here in Catalonia, the board of the third sector, that was almost the social organizations, different kinds of organizations. There are more than 3,000. And some years ago, Cohabitac was not connected with the this social sector, third sector. And now we are members in this third sector. And now this gives more advocacy. We are more together, and I think this is a big thing. And for example, there are other small things that we do joint ventures to develop projects, because sometimes for financial things or for taxes, we don't speak about taxation, we do this, and this do a lot of trust with the partners, because we do business together, and we have to be we have to trust a lot with the partners. And for example, another small example, as a lot of the foundations from Cohabitac offer houses for other social organizations, that they are not housing associations, they are not foundations to manage in houses, but they need these dwellings for do their job. And we are understanding this, and now we have proposed to the government that always in every building has to be some apartments or some flats for the work of the very, very inclusive projects of social organizations.
Thank you. can add some points. Well, in order to continue with the line that Xavier was pointing, Provivienda from its origins was working with other entities as well to develop some programs. We were developing at the beginning, as I already told you, and it has worked in alliance with other third sector and non-profit organizations. For instance, I already told you about, for example, the Housing First program that we brought to Spain with another organization, ORGARC. It enabled us to bring the model and try to build a huge approach in the whole territory and develop the program, and it's getting a huge scale now. And as well, we are participating in, we are always also, as Xavier told, that is some organizations within Cohabitac works as providers for other entities and organizations within the nonprofit. Provivienda as well has been doing this almost from the beginning. And it's managing homes, specializing on the relation with the homeowners and the community, the homeowning associations, the community in the neighborhood, and the families, and making this connection between all these actors, and working in coordination as well with the technicians from the other entities. And we also are part of other international networks, as EAPN, for instance, or FEANSA. I guess taking an example from Cohabitac, we, as already told you in the presentation, we are developing this, and let me see what is exactly the name in English, this new project in Provivienda that is named Alliances for Affordable Housing from Nonprofit, Diagnosis and Networking on the Third Sector for the Provision of Housing, that is funded by the Ministry of Social Rights and Agenda 2030. And we try to push this national-wide network beyond Catalonia and try to connect with other organizations that here in Catalonia you're well developed, but we want to push this network throughout all the country, all the territory, and try to work in common for a roadmap that allows us to advocate for all the mentioned issues in this session, actually.
Well, thanks a lot. Thanks a lot. And I'm going to directly look at this side of the panel and ask if you would like to share some of your concrete experiences with alliances and strategies.
Yeah, I think partnership is absolutely key in order to ensure delivery. We're members, as I've mentioned already, of the Irish Council for Social Housing, where our CEO is part of the Housing Commission that looks at aspects of tenure, standards, quality of life aspects as well. We're members of the European Federation for Living. I'm the present chair of the Tenant Engagement Network, which is for tenant engagement practitioners across Ireland to come together to share learning and to make sure that we're not replicating. We're all dealing with the same challenges at the end of the day as well, you know. So the worst thing we can do is silo the work and, you know, and deal with all those on our own. But sometimes one of the real nice points that comes out of partnerships is the unexpected partnerships that evolve. So Clued is involved in a not-for-profit charity called Energy Cloud, which brings together ourselves, some energy providers, Amazon Web Services, and what we've identified is that there's capacity there to divert excess wind energy that there's about £75 million worth of wind energy is wasted every year in Ireland, because the wind turbines are going at 2-3 o'clock in the morning where there's no demand. So we divert that excess wind energy into people's homes at low incomes and give them free tanks of water. They get a text message in the morning. Don't ask me to explain the mechanics behind how this works, but a small little device goes in to their heat and tank system, and in the morning they get a text message to say you've received a free tank of water. So innovation comes out of partnerships quite naturally. We've provided over 2,000 tanks of water in just the first first few months of the project, and we've now committed that any new build that comes in will have the capacity to have this meter fitted as standard. You know, so innovation is a natural byproduct of partnerships, I think.
So, being the last, and I'm not gonna repeat myself because I think here you have best practices, and but I want to highlight this need of this unitary voice in the sector, and that will allow non-profit sector to be taken into consideration and be involved in designing and implementing housing policies. That's one side. Create synergies, we have seen is key. Collaboration to create guidelines, but to share knowledge, to put in practice best practices, these that have been mentioned, but for example, in terms of allocating housing or exchanging social tenants between entities, which is a model that it's being undertaken in England, for example, because sometimes social tenants do not move because they are afraid of losing their right to access that home. So these are best practices, and I would like to end here. Highlighting the importance role of the non-profit sector in the sense of, and quoting Professor Mullins, that I've mentioned him before, he said that housing associations might be considered as the distant uncle of the voluntary sector, a sector that has grown bigger, financial independence, commercially driven approach, but came from the voluntary sector. And in that sense, I would like to take a bottom-up approach in terms of housing as a human right, housing as a human right linked to other human rights like liberty, like dignity. And in that sense, of course, the person, if the person cannot provide himself, herself that right, then it looks to the family. We have seen it with the economic crisis. If the family or the personal network cannot provide it either, then we go to the community. And who do we find in the community? So we find those organizations, those voluntary or third sector organizations, now smaller, but they can grow bigger. And in that sense, I think the empowerment is there of the community. So the non-profit sector has a big role there, state acting, of course, as a last result, principle of subsidiarity that we call it. Of course, we need the legal framework that we have mentioned, not only to guarantee those minimum standards of quality, also for allocating public resources, not handpicking, but following and giving some competitiveness in the sector. I think it's important, but those entities and those organizations have their own operating dynamics, and they look at the community, and that's important. And an idea that has been mentioned very slightly before, I think Steve was mentioning, don't be afraid of the regulations. It is true that what is the key is to find the balance between the public control and the freedom of action of those entities, or where to find it.
Well, thanks a lot to all of you, and thank you so much to the attendees. Just briefly mention that the questions that you posed, we didn't have time enough for the panelists to be able to respond to them. But as I said in the beginning, both Provivienda and Cohabitac will respond to those questions. They will gather the responses from all the panelists, and they will be publishing those questions in their websites. Feel free to reach out to any of us when you see us walking down the aisles to continue the conversation. And I really cannot add anything else to the discussion because I think that it was a very rich discussion. I hope that all of you enjoyed this as much as I did. And just to briefly recap what have been the main elements of the discussion. So firstly, the importance of speaking about social housing management. Secondly, the necessity to learn from each other based on the basis of solidarity. Thirdly, the need to really put people's needs at the center and to make people part of the design and the implementation of housing solutions and different models for the provision of social and affordable housing. Fourth, to speak about trust, not in abstract terms, but to really give substance to how we're speaking about trust and speak about legal frameworks, speak about evidence-based data policymaking, but that's also linked to the necessities of people. Fifth, to speak about multi-level governance. And last but not least, I think that we need to add a last element, which I think that Steve really put it in a very nice and powerful way, which is innovation that comes as a natural byproduct of partnerships, such as the ones that we hope have been forged throughout the session. So thank you very much. Thank you to the organizers. Thank you to the organizers of the festival, to the panelists, to the attendees. Have a good day.